Corn School is brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and in a corn crop, and guess what? I was wrong. Now, I can't say I love being wrong. I can't say that. But my dad always said, you learn so much more when, actually he said, when you learn more when you're wrong than when you're right. If you're right, you learn nothing. When you're wrong, man, you learn something. So I learned something. And you know what I learned? I learned that planting deep with corn actually makes more yield. And how can that be? It makes no sense. But we look at these cobs, and so what we've learned about corn is that uniform emergence is way more important than a picket fence stand. We know that. So if I have two cobs that I get a bigger gap, I get these cobs farther apart, how much yield do I lose? Less than 1%. So do I lose something if I don't have a cob every 6 inches? Yes, I do, but it's not a big deal. And if you take one cob that loses less than 1%, you put that over the whole field, yeah, the yield loss is pretty doggone small. Hard to spend much money to make that. But if on the other hand, I take those plants and I don't get them to emerge uniformly, so this one emerges on day 1 and this one emerges on day 3, well, guess what? On day 3, this one is 12% lower yielding than this one. Even if I'm 1 day, it's 6% lower yield. We were astounded by those numbers. Shane and my technician and I did that work, and wow, it just blew our brains out. And so then you say, okay, so I have good moisture at 2 inches. I'm gonna plant my corn at 2 inches because I'm a wheat guy, and it's all about how quick I can get that crop out of the ground. The earlier it gets out of the ground, the earlier it flowers. The earlier it flowers, the higher the yield. Well, that's true, except that when I plant at 2 inches, what we've found is I get more variability in that corn emergence. So yeah, I plant at 2 inches versus 2.5 or 3 inches, and I'm emerging a day earlier. So absolutely, I get some plants up a day earlier, but the problem is I get a few plants up a day earlier, I get a bunch more plants up a day later and more the next day, but my window of emergence actually spreads out. So even though that 2-inch depth seems right, I get more variability in that emergence, and that variability in emergence actually lowers yield. Astounding to me. So if we deepen our corn planting depth, we delay emergence. So be careful with that. If I plant in Ontario on the 20th of April and I get 5 weeks of cold backward weather and I plant 3 inches deep, yeah, none of it may emerge, right? So there is a risk. But when I plant 3 inches deep into decent conditions, my emergence starts 1 day later, but on day 1, I get a much bigger chunk of that corn to emerge. On day 2, almost everything else emerges, and so I narrow that window of emergence. So even though I delay it, because everything comes up at the same time, I actually increase yields. So wow, I mean, certainly, you get to day 5, you get cobs like this, yeah, you better try hard not to have really late emergers, because they hurt you for sure. But this planting depth thing, I couldn't believe what we found out this year, and really comes back to doing the flag test and figuring out how important that uniform emergence is. All the old work said that emergence uniformity was more important. This just is a management technique that helps us improve that uniform emergence, and it is not the recommendation that I would have made until we learned this stuff. Very, very cool stuff. If you can, if it looks like a good weather forecast, we're going to plant corn deeper, and that just, it boggles my brain, but that's where we're at. Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com.